Conrad, thank you very much. And I'm quite sure that those two presentations will generate a lot of questions. So then, can you join us? And we're going to be joined as well by James Brown. James, you're very welcome. James is a dairy farmer from County Down and a past chairman of the Ulster Farmers Union Environment Committee. And we're also joined by Brian Irvine, who's head of the Environmental Farming branch within the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, the Environment, Marine and Fisheries Division. So we've heard a lot about the challenges. I think that links into this morning's presentations on grassland management, and it shows the dilemma between getting, we're about 50% as efficient as we could be in terms of grass, so a lot to go for, but obviously we've got to keep the sustainable environment there as well. So who's going to start with questions?
David Wright, Irish Farmers Journal. I suppose really to Conrad, you made a number of big statements there, Conrad, about that you think there'll be more legislation come forward if we don't cure our issues around phosphorus. I suppose a lot of farmers that I spoke to voted for Brexit on the back of that there'll be less regulation and they'll be getting rid of all these, particularly Nitrates Action Programme would have been one piece of legislation that would have been cited to me as a reason to get out of Europe. But you're saying something very different. I just wanted your view and maybe James's view as well on that particular issue.
Yeah, I think, David, my comment would be, whether it's through legislation or not, I think we need to produce milk to the highest environmental standards. We can't get away from that point. And in general, evidence would show that legislation, unfortunately, how regrettable it might be and sometimes misplaced, legislation is often required to do that. So I think just in general, the premise of my presentation is, if we want to export, if we want to continue to produce milk that we can say is produced to the highest environmental standards, we will still, especially if we're to sell milk into Europe and maintain really competitive markets there, we need to demonstrate that Northern Ireland is not going backwards in terms of its environmental standards, but we're really moving forward there. And that's really the basis of the comment that I made.
We maybe hear from James and then
In addition to that, it's not only about legislation, but you please take in mind that also in business-to-business relationships, this will become much more important. When I speak to Friesland Campina, the largest dairy producer in the Netherlands, they're more driven by business-to-business relationships now than by government pressure, because they have discussions with their clients who really have demands about environmental sound production. So that's maybe even more important than government regulations.
James?
As a dairy farmer now, you would be very naive if you thought you were going to sell product into the EU and you were going to put in less standards. I think it's even more important now than ever before. The other thing that I've noticed as a dairy farmer that UK would tend to gold plate any regulations more than what the EU would, and so from that point of view, regulation isn't going to go away.
David?
Brian Irvine, yeah, I just add to that a point to the member about our regulations, and we may think of them as all driven by Europe and everything else, but the actual action programme regulations that we have here are based on local science, a lot of it, the vast majority of it, on AFBI research. Now, it's tailored to local conditions, and really, when you take all the background and noise of EU and regulations and straight bananas and all that away, if you look fundamentally at our action programme, it is all just about good farming practice and about efficient use of nutrients. So it's nothing that we shouldn't be doing anyway, regardless of whether there's an EU there to police you to do it. It's actually efficient for farming, which delivers economic returns, but it also protects the environment. And at the end of the day, farming and life in general depends on the environment, and you've got to operate within the capacity of the environment and your land base. And that's really when you get away from being close to the capacity of your land and exceed that, that's where you run into the problems with your emissions, be it to water, be it gaseous emissions or whatever. So the underpinning regulations we have here are largely good farming practice.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Other question?
Thank you. Sinclair Main, AFP. It's really a question for Thun, I suppose, and thank you for a very honest and frank paper, Thun, outlining the situation in the Netherlands, and clearly it's a wake-up call for all of us in terms of what might happen in the longer term, but in a very different, much more intensive scenario. And I know you focus very much on the dairy sector, but could you care to comment on what is the situation in relation to the pig and poultry sector? And are they having to make similar changes in terms of phosphorus reduction, or is the brunt of the, if you like, new strategy being taken forward by the dairy sector?
If we look at the pig and poultry sector, well, at least they did not exceed their phosphate limits. So from that point of view, they're not debated in the last year. But of course, in fact, as some people call it, the bio-industry, it's debated heavily, of course. And it's concentrated, especially on the sandy soils in the Netherlands, which are in the eastern and the southern part, where we have extreme high concentrations of livestock facilities, causing a lot of problems with ammonia, particulate matter, odor, traffic. So there is a lot of resistance against that. And now regarding the nutrient issues, they're now working on mandatory manure processing, because for some time ago it was not mandatory, it was voluntary. And there were always the free riders who profited from the efforts of others. So now it's mandatory for everyone, and they're now planning really large-scale manure processing plants of 100,000 tons, 500,000 tons of manure per year to be processed. So they're facing also immense challenges when it comes to phosphate, and it has to be exported mainly. And especially imagine that if people from the biosolids sector are able to extract phosphate from all the biosolid waste, it means that there will be a huge phosphate surplus in the Netherlands and that we need to export more manure than we do now. So manure processing is inevitable and it has to occur at a large scale. But everywhere where plants are planned now, we see that citizens are opposing, with a very high NIMBY character, of course, but also from the point of view that they say, well, okay, then we got rid of the manure, but we still have the ammonia, we still have the nuisance of the odor, the particulate matter, and especially now there is a link between ammonia and public health, so the risk is larger than people thought it was. So the pressure is increasing also to the pig and poultry sector, which means that they're really under pressure. On the other hand, if I look on the longer term, we see that the cost price of producing pigs in the Netherlands is, well, not reducing, and in other countries they can do it cheaper now. So in part we already see some shift of fattening pigs to Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, those regions where the sector is increasing, which means that part of our sector maybe will migrate to that part of Europe, but also that you see that in our country people shift from fattening to piglet production.
And thank you. Have we another question? There's one here.
Alan Chambers, arable farmer from County Down. I shouldn't really be asking a question here, but I'll cover myself by saying that grass is a cereal. My question would be regarding surplus phosphate that's produced in Northern Ireland on some farms. Is it not true to say that thousands and thousands of hectares of land within this province are shown by soil analysis to be largely deficient in P, and therefore their productivity potential has been held back? Should we not be concentrating our efforts on finding methods of getting surplus phosphate from farms that produce the surplus to those areas where we are extremely deficient in P? Surely that's a simple answer.
It sounds fairly simple, but I suspect it's not. Do you want to, James?
Well, I'll first take this. Within the land use strategy document, one of the big things was finding out exactly where the land is. It is lacking in phosphate and that which is too high in phosphate. And within that document, there are a lot of the problems that could be solved. But certainly, we don't want to be in a position that the Netherlands is in for Northern Ireland and going for growth. We do not want to be facing a position where we have to reduce cow numbers. That is definitely not what Northern Ireland needs. So we need to look at that strategy document again, and there's a lot of good stuff in there, and we need it all taken in.
Yeah, and it is something we often hear, and I know it's something that John Bailey and his team have looked at. I think in reality, whenever you start looking at the figures and look at the areas, you suddenly find there are a lot of those areas that, because of sensitive habitats and various other things, and also because of just the land type, topography, etc., you physically couldn't spread slurry there, nor would you probably want to do that. Some of them have very good water quality already, and if we start moving large amounts of phosphorus to those areas, water quality is going to decline. So there are certainly areas, there are fields that could be achievable on, but our surplus is so great that it's not going to address the full problem. It can, I've said in my presentation, locally it is a solution for some areas, some farmers can do it, but it's not something that can be done on as wide scale an approach as it might think to start off with.
Okay. Is there one final question? I think we have time for one more question. One down in here.
Thank you. Wilfred Crawford, Nutriplan. Is it not a simple fact that if we capitalise on our grassland base, that the phosphorus problem is actually answered? And has there not been an overall wrong direction in the way in which dairying has gone for very high yielding cows with very high concentrate inputs? This of itself creates a major problem. It'd be interesting to know actually in the Netherlands, what is your actual production from forage? But we reckon that if you get to about 4,000 litres from forage and keep a reasonable size of cow, we shouldn't have a phosphorus problem. Is that correct?
Well, I'll make a few comments on it. I think you're absolutely right. We went to a very low concentrate input system, such as New Zealand and sort of in the Republic of Ireland. Many of our phosphorus problems on dairy farms would disappear. But there is a reason that we have gone down the more intensive route we've had, and that, of course, is because we have a country with a limited land base, and for farmers who need to produce a given volume of milk to be sustainable, then intensification has been the strategy that is required. Modelling at Hillsborough has shown that the sort of 8,000 litre autumn calving system is probably one of the most robust systems. So we have looked at it, and we believe that that system is one of the most robust, as well as sort of a higher input, high milk output spring calving system. So the systems we have, I believe that if they're operated efficiently, they can be very efficient, and they can be certainly competitive on a global basis. I believe that an 8,000 litre system, even and if I put up the figures and we've looked at it, can result in very low P surpluses if concentrate use is properly managed. So I don't think it's necessary. I also agree with the comment that we need to go back to grass. We need to get a renewed focus on grass, but that's not going back to 4,500, 5,000 litre cows. That's a renewed focus on grass and quality grass silage within 7,000, 8,000 litre systems for the majority of farmers.
Problem in Northern Ireland is what I call walkable acres for cows. And so what might be a solution where I am might not be a solution in a lot of other areas. But I would totally agree that you need to get as much grazed grass in there. It's the cheapest food. And I mean, I've been operating under derogation now for a long time, and my phosphate balance has fallen down. My phosphate level in soils is normally about 2 now. and my phosphate balance will be sitting in around 3 this year, and it's been from 1 to 3 this past number of years. But the whole point of it is get grazed grass in there. It's the cheapest food. Not everybody can do that, but it's a lifestyle decision too. You know, you want to focus on profit. We're into volatile milk producing time now. There won't be any support. I mean, through Brexit, you cannot depend on any support. So you're going to have to compete with volatility, and you may well need to change the direction your business is. That's all, you know, what I would.
Yeah, and just add to the sort of the theme, and as Conrad has said, they're different systems, but generally, if you look at the trends over recent years, there's been a move away from milk from forage, and really going back to that, and less concentrate, more forage, will put a lot of things right in terms of the pea surplus, because where does the pea surplus come from? It comes in imported fertiliser, which is the smaller input, but concentrate feed. So how do you reduce the pea surplus? Well, I would say you could practically eliminate the amount of chemical pea fertiliser needed because there's enough surplus overall, but less concentrate input in terms of pea. That can be overall less concentrate volume, but also reduced pea content of it. And you know, the numbers are there. There's a surplus, there's a balance, and everything else. You look at the inputs, and if you want to get your surplus down, you reduce the inputs.
Well, if you look to the Dutch situation, there is for especially the farms in the center and the south and the east, there is the opportunity that we grow maize, and we have 230,000 hectares of maize. So a quarter of the area for dairy farms is maize, and of course that's higher digestibility, low in protein, which means that in these farms we can stay with milk productions 8,500, 9,000 liters. With concentrate levels ranging between 23-28%, something like that. So I think these are lower fractions of concentrates compared to what you have here. But okay, when you're in pure grass, it will be a slightly different situation. But what we also saw in previous years that when concentrates were not that expensive, and it was also a kind of insurance premium because, with the very variable weather, you never know, so maybe give them some extra because they might need it. And we see now that when farmers have to export manure, they're more keen on feeding the proper amount of concentrates and not overfeeding the animals in concentrates. And then it appeared that they could feed less concentrates than they ever thought it was possible. And that's also a process of becoming aware of the possibilities of reducing concentrate amounts in the feed. So I couldn't tell where you can come with improved forage, but I think it must be possible to reduce indeed concentrate amounts in the ration, which is also the most important factor in reducing the phosphorus surpluses at the farm level, but also at the national level.
Thank you. I think that's been a fascinating discussion from our panel. For me, it's very clear that there is an opportunity for us to improve our intensity in farming. We must do it on an environmentally friendly basis. We shouldn't expect nor seek to see any reduction in the regulation or standards going forward. We could actually, in a post-Brexit environment, we could see that actually as a virtue and see it as an opportunity with the right science base to help product production. So a big hand for our panel and our speakers.